Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Good Work podcast. I am your host, Cassandra Martinson. I am so excited to be sitting down and to be creating this podcast. Happy Tuesday. I hope that you're having a great morning, a great afternoon, a great night. Whenever you're listening to this, I hope that you're doing well and that it's been a good week so far. I am so excited to be able to sit down and talk about something that is so important to me and something that is such a passion of mine, which is God and my relationship with God, what that has all looked like because it has been a roller coaster to get to where I am today. But nonetheless, I am so excited. If you have not already, I really recommend that you go listen to the intro episode to this podcast. I just want everyone to be aware of what my mission is behind this podcast. I really desire to give people a different perspective than you may have ever heard on Christianity and what having a relationship with God looks like. I think it's kind of been twisted and morphed to be something that it's not really at its core. There's just been a lot of rules and legalistic type things that I think have been added to Christianity. And while they can be great for an individual, it's definitely not necessary in having a relationship with God. So, that's kind of where my heart is behind this. And I really just want everyone to be able to listen to this podcast and feel seen, feel heard, feel loved. I want you to be able to show up exactly as you are because that's what I'm going to be doing every single week. I want to be so brutally honest that it hurts and hope that you find some relatability in my vulnerability and that it inspires you yourself to be vulnerable with others and even with God. Because if I'm being honest with you, sometimes I even struggle to be vulnerable with God. Honestly, I struggle with that more often than not. It's something I'm working on. I am not a vulnerable person in my nature, but I think that there's a lot of freedom and a lot of healing and relatability that comes from being vulnerable. With that being said, today I want to give you a better idea of who I am. I want to talk about my walk with God and my journey to God, what that has looked like. Because, like I said, it's been a roller coaster, and I wish I could come on here and give you a really nice, beautiful story, but it's just not been my story to God. And like I was saying before, I am not a vulnerable person at all. So this is going to be something totally new for me, something extremely outside of my comfort zone, but I'm trusting God with that, knowing that He would never call me to do something that scares the actual crap out of me if He didn't have a plan for it. So, I'm trusting him in that. I want to just get into it, be really real, be honest, and be vulnerable with you. Like I said, my name is Cassandra. I go by Cass. I just feel like I fit Cass better than Cassandra. Sorry to my parents, but it's what I like better. I was born and raised in Utah. I have lived in Utah my entire life. I love it here. I really don't ever want to move unless God calls my husband and I somewhere else, but I just love it here. It's my favorite place on earth. It besides Oregon, I should say that, but it is probably my favorite place to live for sure. I feel like I grew up with kind of a normal childhood in some ways, and then in other ways a totally unique childhood and experience. For one, growing up in Utah, I feel like you kind of grow up in this bubble. Everyone that lives outside of Utah or has lived outside of Utah has definitely told me about how different Utah is. And it really is like you're living in your own bubble. And while a lot of people may not like that, I really appreciate that about Utah. It's given me a lot different perspective on life than I think most people have, and definitely a different story. So understand that that's where I'm going to be coming from and talking to you today. Being born in Utah and raised, I was raised in the predominant religion here, which is the LDS Church, Mormonism. That is what I was born into. And my family and I weren't like super devout Mormons, but we went to church every Sunday. My parents had different roles that they fulfilled in the church, and that was about it. I left when my family, I should say, left when I was 9 years old, and so I didn't get super deep into like the different activities and things that the church had for people that were older than me at the time. So with us leaving when I was 9, I kind of was a different kid. Like, my parents just told me that I grew up really fast, that I've matured quickly for my age, and in a lot of ways I would agree with them. But being 9 years old, I still really had a good understanding of God for a 9 year old, I would say. And I always deeply cared about my relationship with God. Even when I was LDS, even growing up, even to now, God is something that I, for the most part, have always really cared about in my life. And so I remember when we left, my parents are awesome and they told us, if you guys want to keep going to this church, we will drive you, we will take you. We don't want to force you to do something that you're not comfortable with, because I think honestly at this time my parents were even a little bit like, this is something that we haven't done for a while, like attend a different church, and it was kind of scary. It was a big thing for my family. And so they gave us that freedom, but me being who I am, I followed my parents, and I have two younger siblings who did the same. For about a year, I want to say, I think it was about a year, my family and I spent a lot of time looking at different Christian denominational churches, going pretty much to a different church every Sunday, it felt like, until we came across this church that we stayed at for a very long time. When we came across this church that my parents really liked and I liked, we stayed for quite a while. I want to say, well, for me, it was a while at 9 years old. I think it was about a year, 2 years. We were consistently going to that church. And then my parents started helping someone plant a different Christian church, and they're still involved with that to this day. We were going to two different churches during that time period. So the church that my parents were helping plant would get together on like Friday or Saturday night, and then we would go to church on Sunday morning to this church that we had started going to for a while. And I remember just getting a really heavy dose of God, of the Bible, learning about all that kind of stuff. And I was so young that I absorbed a lot of it, but a lot of it also went over my head. And during all this time, I was heavily bullied at school, like severely bullied. I would say it didn't get better till I was about in the fifth or sixth grade. And also to note, my childhood being different, I would say, than like a lot of people, at least around me in Utah, had a lot to do with the fact that my mom worked her butt off because she wanted to give us the best life possible. And my dad at the time was really struggling with a lot of things that he was going through. And because of him having to deal with the things that he was going through, it really left my mom to be the sole income provider. And so I grew up feeling really lonely. Being bullied at school, I had no friends. My mom being gone all the time and my dad needing to take care of his own things, I just felt really lonely as a kid. I have a younger brother who is 2 years younger than me and a younger sister who is 6 years younger than me. And because I was kind of in my own world and grew up faster than I should have, I spent a lot of my time alone and I loved to read. That was kind of what became my thing, just being alone all the time. And my brother and my sister became really close. My brother has the biggest, sweetest heart ever. And so he would sit down with my sister and play dolls and play cars and do all the things. And so they grew to be really close together. And then I grew kind of just being on my own and being apart. There were some things that happened in my childhood that I later learned, just in the last couple years as an adult, really led me to have some abandonment issues and abandonment attachment styles and things like that, things that I've had to work through as an adult. But my childhood in that regard, I would say, was really different than a lot of the kids' childhoods that lived around me. But through all of this, going through all these different churches and stuff and being bullied, I finally got to the point that I had to go to junior high school. I decided I wanted junior high to be different. I had read a lot of nonfiction in my childhood. That is my favorite genre. I love self-help books. I love reading other people's stories and being able to see how people go through life. And so as a kid, my favorite books were the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. I read a ton of those. And in one of those books, I had read someone talking about the fact that your mind is more powerful than what you're going through, pretty much. Like, it's more powerful than your surroundings. And so I really learned mind over matter to be a real thing. And I wanted to put that to the test and have my own, basically, testimony of it. Going into junior high, I decided that I wanted things to be different. I decided my first day of junior high that I was going to say hello to everyone in every class I had, or as many people as I could, I should say. And so everyone that sat around me, I would just say hi, introduce myself, ask them their name, how they were doing. And after a couple weeks of doing this in every class, I started to develop some real friendships and I became one of the popular kids, but it's because I was friends with everybody. I wasn't popular money wise. I didn't live in a nice house or anything like that, but I just was friends with everybody, truly. I wanted to be friends with the people that were also loners because I'd been there and I knew what that was like, but I also wanted to be friends with the preppy kids and the cheerleaders and the nerds, and I was friends with the kids that were doing drugs in the parking lot. Like, I was friends with everybody, and I truly love my life. I look back at that time of my life and still smile because it really changed who I was as a person and just became kind of a foundation for who I am today. That was the beginning of junior high. With that, here where I live, junior high is 7th grade to ninth grade. So I developed a lot of friends that were older than me, and those friends that were older than me had friends that were older, sorry. Yes, and those friends that are older than me had friends that were older than them. So I had friends that were like 3, 4, 5 years older than me, honestly. This is when my life took a really, really big turn. I started to develop crushes on boys, and I thought boys were cute, and I got into a lot of problems with boys. Like, I was definitely making out with a lot of boys, kissing a lot of boys, and I had a lot of flings. I was always talking to quite a few guys at once, and that was just kind of the life that I lived, and I liked it. But because of the fact that I grew up feeling alone, deep down, I was always looking for love. I was the kid growing up that dreamed about getting married. I was not someone that dreamed about being a mom and having a family and doing that sort of thing. I just wanted to grow up, meet a great guy, my Prince Charming, and get married. And growing up, I definitely see that that was something that I wanted, but I went about it in all of the wrong ways. With talking to all of these guys and going through what I was going through, they were giving me the attention that I wanted, the validation that I wanted, making me feel special and all of these things, but I was not naive. I was not stupid. I definitely knew what a lot of these guys were wanting from me, especially because a lot of them were 2, 3 years older than me. I always had my guard up, never letting anyone get too close to me, but close enough that I could develop feelings, they could develop feelings, and like I would just see where things would go. And that got me into a lot of trouble. I ended up hurting a lot of people. I ended up getting really hurt, but that was kind of my experience at that point in my life. Through all of this, I'm still going to church because my parents are making me, but it's starting to become less and less that I'm going, and I'm sleeping in on Sunday some weeks and just doing homework, and my parents giving me a pass because they did know I had homework. They knew I was tired, but they would be like, "You need to come next week. You need to go to church." And through all of this, knowing all these diverse groups of people, I was introduced to a lot of different kinds of music, different TV shows, different hobbies, different things like that. And I started to live my life for myself and do things that I thought would fill me and make me happy. And I lived my life really just in rebellion to God. I didn't really want that much to do with God during the week, but on Sundays I was cool to go and worship and sing the songs and listen to the sermons. But during the week, I didn't want to have anything to do with God. So I really lived that portion of my life with one foot in the world, but one foot in Christianity and in God, which I came to find out just wasn't working for me, and it wasn't going to work for me ever, but it was an illusion that I thought I could live. It was not good. But going through junior high, going through all these things, I became severely depressed, like very, very, very depressed to the point of wanting to end my life. I remember it got so bad that I went to the computer that we had in my kitchen so the whole family could use, and looking up the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, writing that down on a piece of paper. And in my room, hanging on the wall, was a little cross that my mom had bought me. I remember putting the note, just kind of tucking it behind the cross a little bit so it was sticking out so I could see it, but seeing the cross always first. And this is when I really started to realize that God was after my heart and He was trying to have a relationship with me, but I was always going for other things, trying to fill me up and trying to make me feel whole and feel loved in the ways that I later came to learn only God could. Through this time of living in rebellion, being depressed, going through all the things I was going through, I remember having a conversation with my dad after a friend of mine had actually committed suicide. I remember just being extremely depressed, extremely sad. I didn't know what to do going forward. And so I would stay in my room and cry and cry and cry, and I wouldn't come out. And I just felt the life leaving me. And my dad had a hard conversation with me, and he said something that I will never forget. And he told me that it's easier to be sad than it is to be happy, because being happy takes more effort than being sad does. And there's so much truth in that. Like, I could sit here and be sad every day. I mean, you look at the world and what we're living in, and there's so much to be sad about. Or even just looking into my past, I have a lot to be sad about, just like I think a lot of people do. But he challenged me by saying, start looking for things to be happy about. And he made me realize that if I ever want to be happy again, I have to put in the work to be happy. And that conversation, that statement was just so freeing to me, because I feel like it allowed me the room and the space to be sad and mourn the loss of my friend, but also realize that I can be happy moving forward, that this will be a hard time in my life, but my life is still going, even though I felt the guilt and the weight of my friends being gone, like mine was still going. And I had the decision to continue to be sad and let the life leave me at one point, or to move forward in happiness and seek joy that was around me. Because no matter how dark something gets, there's always a glimmer of light in something. If you have to find happiness, even just in the breath that you're breathing and the life that you have today, that can be enough, because that is a blessing and that is something to be happy about. I mean, for crying out loud, there's so many people that didn't wake up today that wanted to. And so I started to find even the littlest of things to be grateful for. And it ultimately turned into like a snowball of gratitude and happiness. I was a happy person again. It took a lot of time, but I chose happiness over sadness. So at this point, being happier, I started going to church a little bit more. I was still doing stuff with guys and not like participating in the greatest things, watching the greatest things, listening to the greatest things, whatever. But I started to go to church more often, and I started to see these things in my day to day life that I could not explain away as coincidences, and that I just knew deep down in my soul was God chasing after my heart and God seeking to have a relationship with me. And so I kind of dabbled more into wanting to have something to do with God during the week and not just on Sundays, but I struggled because I didn't want to give up the life that I was living. Because, like I said, I was finding validation, I was finding fulfillment, I was finding quote unquote love and guys that cared about me. And so it was something I wasn't ready to let go of, but I was ready to start giving God some more time and start exploring what that really looked like. And in giving God some more of my time and listening to sermons on YouTube, because that was something I had started to want to do, and listening to worship music, and again, just paying more attention to these things that were happening in my life that were not coincidences, I started to change just who I was, what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be, who I wanted to talk to. All of those things in my life had started to change. And I didn't feel like I had to change or be a different person. It was just something that I had changed and started to want to do differently. Slowly but surely, having all these guys I was talking to started to fade. The things I was watching just weren't really appealing to me anymore, and the stuff I was listening to changed really, really quick. I gave up, like, I was really big into rap and music like that, and it just became something I didn't really want to listen to anymore. And so that changed really, 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 really fast. My friend groups kind of started to change, and I was still friends with everybody, but I wasn't hanging out with certain people as often. And it wasn't because I was judging them or thought ill of them in any way. It's just that we didn't really have as much to relate to anymore. I couldn't relate to the things they were doing or thinking or saying, and they couldn't relate to the things that I was doing, thinking, or saying. So we kind of just started to grow apart. My walk with God at this point took a really big turn for the worse, and I became really, really, really self righteous. And I was still doing things that were not good, and I was still living a life that was pleasing to myself and glorifying to myself. But I looked at myself almost as like, well, I'm only doing this and they're doing that. At least I'm not doing that. I don't have that to worry about. And I unintentionally put myself up on this pedestal of being better than the people around me. That destroyed me. Like, that started to consume me. And it wasn't until I got into a relationship and someone had pointed out to me the way that I was acting that it made me take a look at myself and be like, "Oh my gosh, that is true. I'm acting really prideful when I'm literally no better than somebody else. Just because they choose to do something differently than me doesn't mean that I'm better than them or they're worse than me. It just means that we do different things and we have different struggles and different likes and interests, and you fill in the blank. We're just different." And I later came to find out it's just that we all sin differently. Like, even sitting here today as a Christian, I still have my things that I struggle with, and it may not be alcoholism or theft or murder or anything like that. It's still just as bad as that sin, because the Bible says that any sin that you've committed is sin against God, and that in and of itself is a topic for a different episode. There's nothing that makes any of us better than any person at all. Like, I am on the same level as the worst person that you can think of, and we all are on that same level, but it takes a real heart posture change, and it takes God opening your eyes to a lot of things for you to come to that point. It took me a long time to accept that, and I'm sure even people listening don't want to accept that, and I hear you because I was the same way. But by the grace of God, I pray that you will come to a place of realizing that we are all equal. Like, truly, we're all equal. We all sin, we all struggle, we're all human. But I was still going to church every week, and by the time that I turned 16 years old, that's the time, like I said, that I started to change and go through the things I was going through. And my parents had fully left the church that they had been attending, that we as a family had been attending every Sunday morning, and they left to go to this church that they helped plant. And so they were doing that full time, attending that church full time. I loved the people at the church, but I loved the church that we'd been going to on Sundays more. And the church my parents had helped plant had started getting together on Sunday mornings, so it was a conflict. Like, you could only go to one or the other. And so I went to their church for a very long time, and I was like, this is just not where I want to be. I just don't feel God tugging at my heart as heavily here, and I want to go back to where we were going before. I started driving myself out to the church that we had been attending prior to my parents leaving to pursue their church plant fully. I was doing that every week, driving myself out, going to church. And like I said, I was changing. I was self-righteous, but I was letting go of a lot of the things that I was doing. And yet again, more confirmation and more examples of God chasing after my heart, removing the things that weren't of Him in my life at the time and replacing them with things that were of Him, but my heart hadn't changed yet. Around this time, I got into a relationship that was extremely toxic on both ends because, as I said, I was self-righteous. I felt I was better than really everybody around me. And because I was living in rebellion to the Lord in that regard, I brought toxicity into the relationship. And there was a lot of toxicity on the other end that was brought in as well because we're all human and we all have our baggage. That's just the reality of life and of being human on this earth. And so we both struggled and put each other through a lot. And it was through this relationship that I experienced real rejection for the first time ever. I had experienced guys not liking me before, not really wanting to talk to me, and that was fine. But this was the relationship that for the first time in my life, I let every single wall and every single guard down. And I let someone fully see me and fully know me. And I wanted to be fully loved because of that. But there were some things that were happening in the relationship that alluded to me not being fully loved. I think everybody can relate to that. Like, I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago. All that we want is to be fully known and fully seen and fully loved. But to be fully loved, you have to be those first two things, fully seen and fully known. And that's a scary thing to do, is to let someone see everything that you are, knowing that they have the option to fully love you or not. In this relationship that I was in, I developed a lot of comparison issues because of some struggles that the guy I was dating with had. And I felt like I wasn't enough in every regard. I felt like I wasn't pretty enough. I wasn't curvy enough in certain areas. I wasn't happy enough. I wasn't like smart enough. I felt like I just wasn't enough in really every regard. And a lot of it had to do with my image and how I viewed myself when I was in front of a mirror. I just felt like I wasn't enough. I lived with a lot of rejection in that relationship, and then after it ended, and I dealt with a lot of abandonment issues because of some things that I went through in my childhood, and so I contributed to a lot of someone else not feeling like they were enough as well. I was always terrified that this person I was dating was gonna leave me. Because of that, my heart was never in it 1,000% until the very end of my relationship. I was always terrified they were gonna leave me. And because of that, I started to kind of pull back and come up with a plan of what am I going to do if this happens. So that created a lot of issues in the relationship. We both just really put each other through the ringer. It ended up not working out. No matter what we did to try to salvage the relationship, it just did not work. Throughout a lot of the relationship, I could definitely feel God trying to call me out of it, giving me signs to tell me this is not where I was supposed to be. But like I said, this was the first time I had ever let someone completely in, and I was in love, like the youngest, sweetest, purest love. It was the first time I'd really ever known what love was, and it was everything that I wanted, and I wanted to marry this person, and it was just a really messy really painful situation on both ends. Like I said, it ultimately ended up not working out, but going through that relationship and all of the hard things that we went through, I really was pushed toward the Lord because things got so bad at one point that I was like, I cannot keep doing this. And I think I did what a lot of people do when things are hard is we look to God and we almost say, like, God, I need you. Like, it's a dire situation. Please fix this. Please come to me. I can't do it on my own and in my own strength. I need you. And I did that, and I started to again see God chasing after my heart, see him wanting something to do with me. But I didn't want to commit fully again because I was definitely living a life in rebellion to the Lord, even in that relationship, but still going to church. He was still a part of my life throughout the week a little bit, but I was not ready to fully commit. And so I got out of that relationship feeling a lot of pain, a lot of rejection, a lot of heartbreak. Just, I felt horrible. Honestly, getting out of that relationship, I I maintained a relationship with God a little bit, like still kind of seeking after him, sprinkling him into my life here and there. But ultimately, the loss of that relationship and the loss of the future that I had created in my mind and wanted so badly deep down led me to a place of not wanting anything to do with God. I didn't want to talk to him. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to read my Bible. I didn't want to hear anybody speak of him. I didn't want anything to do with him because I came to a point of asking God, how could you do this to me? How could you take the person that I loved more than anything in the whole entire world away from me? How could you allow me to struggle with what I struggled with to contribute negatively to the relationship in the ways that I did? How could you allow this person to hurt me in the ways that they hurt me? How could you allow any of this to have happened? Like, we were in love. Why couldn't you fix it? I prayed to you. I reached out. Like, I just really wrestled with God at this point. And because of the extreme sheer heartache and heartbreak that I was experiencing and the mourning of a life that I had wanted so badly, I, like I said, didn't want anything to do with God. And I lived my life this way for years. Years just being upset with God, being hurt, being angry. And it was hard. But through this time, I started talking to my now husband, and him and I had actually met when I was younger. I was 14 when I met my husband, and he was a couple years older than me, so we didn't really get anywhere at this point in time because we had such an age gap, but we kind of like we talked on and off and dated, if you will say, on and off, but it was never anything really serious because we were just so different in where we were at in life and our age and what we were doing. But I definitely had a lot of like love and care for my husband even before when I was younger, before we started dating again and stuff. But this last time that we started dating, our relationship just worked out and we loved each other and we really cared about each other. We fell in love. I mean, this guy is the man of my dreams and he makes me so happy and makes me feel safe and secure and loved in ways that I've never felt before. But our marriage came with its fair share of struggles because, like I said, I had dealt with a lot of heartache and pain, and this was brought into my marriage. I brought this into my marriage, and I didn't mean to, but I had just really felt like I was supposed to be with my husband. And I would write things down in my journal asking God, like, if this is who I'm supposed to be with, please make this apparent. Please allow him to say this, to do this, allow me to see this. And those things would happen like the very next day. I'm not kidding. And so I moved forward in this relationship with my husband but we weren't married at this time, sorry. But I moved forward with it because I just felt like God was saying, yeah, this is where you're supposed to be. And it might be confusing, but just trust me. So I did, but I never took the time to deal with the heartache that I was feeling and the pain. And so I definitely brought that into my marriage. For a long time, it really hurt my marriage. And I remember coming clean and just telling my husband everything that I was dealing with. And we were married at this point. And I remember it really hurt my husband. I mean, how could it not? But I thought that I would forever live with this pain and live with this extreme weight on my shoulders and my chest every single day of mourning the loss of something that I cared about so much and that I wanted so deeply. It took about a year for God to really work through that pain and that heart after I did talk to my husband about it. I finally got over it, which was a huge blessing from God because, like I said, I never thought that I would. That's where my walk with God really began. I really gave myself to God fully at that point in a way that I never had before. I remember being in the shower one day just crying out to God, like on my knees in the shower, asking God to please take the pain. And if I'm being totally honest, which I said I would be, I was terrified to let go of that pain because I had placed my identity in this man and in our relationship so much that I didn't know what I was going to be without it. I remember I got to that point that day where I was like, I cannot do this anymore. I don't know who I am. I'm married. I don't know how I could possibly be dealing with this pain anymore and this heartache. And I need you, God. Like, I will trust you with this. I trust you to take it, but please heal my heart. There came a day, and I don't want to get into it too much because it relates so much to somebody else, and I don't ever want to speak ill of somebody, but a day in December of last year of 2023, everything became so real to me. Throughout this time, this like 3 or 4 year span of just aching and not knowing why I could be going through what I'm going through and dealing with what I'm dealing with, I was praying, I think it's John 13:7. It is really important. I think that someone else could use this right now. John 13:7, and it's Jesus saying, "You do not realize what I am doing now, but you will later." I remember having that on my wall when I was going through the heartbreak I was going through, like fresh out of that breakup. I put that verse on my wall, and almost every single day, except for that period of not wanting anything to do with God, I would pray that verse like, God, I don't know what you're doing, but you promise me that I will know one day. And so I pray that you make that so real to me. At the very end of last year, one night, I went against every single thing in me to do what I felt God had called me to do. And I took a phone call that absolutely changed my entire life. It became so real to me why God had allowed the relationship to end, why God had allowed me to go through the pain that I went through, and why I am where I am today. It was in that moment that I found freedom like I'd never known before. I experienced God just really answering my prayer. And that was when I realized that God does hear us. And there had been other instances in my life before this where God had come through and answered my prayers for sure. But this prayer and this answer and the way it was delivered, I knew that God heard me and He cared and He loved me. And it just was like a full circle moment. And I just remember feeling so much peace in my heart and like all the pain, every single ounce of pain I had been feeling had been taken from me. I experienced freedom, like I said, just complete 100% total freedom. I had already been caring about my walk with God up to this point since that day I prayed for God to take all of what I was dealing with when I was in the shower. This moment was when I decided I'm going to live my whole life for you, God. You did this for me, and this was what I thought I would live my entire life in bondage to, and you just took it away in a matter of like a couple hour phone call, like quite a few hours of a phone call, but he took it all away. This is when I decided I'm going to live my life for God every single day. I just found freedom in Christ. Like, I didn't feel the need to have to be perfect anymore the way that I did in my last relationship because I felt I needed to be perfect. Like, I just felt loved for who I was. I felt freedom. I felt like I could continue to live my life the way that I wanted, and I knew that God would help me clean it up. I didn't feel the need to have to clean myself up anymore. I just felt the love of God wrap around me in that moment, and I've never looked back since. I tell you all of this just to tell you that I think all of us at one point or another will live with something that we just want to be free from. Whether that's something that we are doing ourselves, like we struggle with an addiction or a tendency or something that we ourselves are doing, or whether that's something that someone has done to us. I've also not shared certain things I've lived through in my life for the sake of time, but I will talk about them later. But maybe it's something that someone has done to you that hurt you, that made you feel unworthy or like you don't have value or just made you feel horrible pain. Or maybe it's something that you fear. Maybe you live with a lot of fear of something. Like, no matter what it is, something just came to me too. The fear of needing to be perfect, because I lived with that for a while and I didn't touch on that, which I should have, but I will in a different episode. I think we all just live with the desire to be freed from something. And it's going to be unique for each person, but mine was the desire to be free from pain. And I I thought I would live with the pain that I lived with forever until God set me free from that. But I tried getting into another relationship. That didn't free me from my pain. I tried to pursue a career that I did well at, and that didn't free me from my pain. I made money, and that didn't free me from my pain. I made more friends, and that didn't free me from my pain. I tried, like, a lot of things to find freedom from the pain, and nothing worked. And it wasn't until I tried God and I decided to see what that could look like and just say, hey, I'm going to give all this to you and I trust you with what you're going to do with it. And that was the first time that I experienced real freedom from what I was living in. And I just want to speak to whoever is where I was. You can try every single thing that this world has to offer you: the drugs, the alcohol, the sex, the money, the career, the friendships, the relationship, whatever. Try those things if you want. You can try every single thing, and it will fulfill you for a minute. It will definitely fulfill you for a second. But when it's over and you come down from that high, you will feel more empty, more broken, and more alone than you felt before you even tried that thing to fix whatever it was that was hurting. And I've lived through that and I've experienced that time and time and time again. And all I can tell you is just from my own personal experience, there is nothing in this world that could ever free you from what you're living through except for Jesus Christ. And try everything that you want. Please try to prove me wrong if that is your mission. It will not work. I guarantee you it will not work. I just pray for whoever is living in bondage and living as a slave to something, because I lived it too and it's awful. But there is a man that lived a perfect life 2,000 years ago, a human life, who suffered and was betrayed and faced rejection, faced humiliation, felt a lot of love, had friends, lived a very human life, but was perfect and ended up dying the most humiliating, shameful death ever for the sake of freeing you from what you're going through right now. Because I think a lot of us also live with the feeling of, when we take a second to reflect on who we are, we know that we do things that aren't great. Whether it's that you struggle with lying, or maybe you're a full-blown murderer, or maybe you struggle with with like using your time well, or there's all these things that we could get after ourselves about because we're our own worst critics. But when we take time to self-reflect, we realize that we're not perfect and that there are things that we struggle with and we maybe even get upset with ourselves for. And some of those things, rightfully so, because we are not perfect. And the reality is that all of this is going to end one day. We're all going to die, and we're all going to have to give an account for the life that we have lived. But there is someone that died to know you and to save you from the very thing that you are going through, and someone that is going to stand there on your behalf and welcome you into heaven because they died the death that you could not for the sins that you have committed. My mission with this podcast is to be real and to be vulnerable, because I can guarantee you that what you are going through, I have been through to some extent and in some capacity. I may be young, but I have messed up a lot. I have been through a lot of things that I did not talk about, like I said, for the sake of time. Life is really, really hard, but we were promised to not have to go through it alone if we don't want to. That's the great thing about God, is that He will never force Himself upon you. He is such a gentleman, but He wants to have a relationship with you and to set you free from what you're going through and to care about you and to save you from yourself and the things that you are experiencing, but only if you want that. I just want to encourage you that if you want to explore what Christianity is, to explore what having a relationship with God is like, do not clean yourself up. Do not create a to-do list of, I have to go to church, I have to pray, I have to give this up, I have to start doing this in order to pursue a relationship with God or even think about that, because that is not what you have to do. And God doesn't want you to do that. He wants to love you right where you are at, with everything that you are doing and everything that you are going through. If you are doing something that is the complete opposite of what you think a Christian would do, go to God. Go to God and trust that if there is anything in your life that needs to be cleaned up, that the two of you will do that together. And you will desire, like I said in my story, as you go to God and He starts to work in your heart and chase after you, you will desire to do different things. You will desire to be a different person. And it's not because you feel the guilt to, or you feel shame to do so, or anything like that, or people tell you you have to. It will be because you genuinely want to do that. And so I just encourage you, go to God as you are, let Him love you as you are, because He already does. It's not like you have to convince God to love you, and there's nothing that you could ever do to make God love you any more or any less than He does in this very moment. And so if you're looking for freedom, if you're looking for love like I was, if you're looking for forgiveness, if you're looking for joy, hope, peace, whatever you're looking for, I promise you that the purest, most whole form of that is found in Jesus. And the worst thing that can happen is you sit down and you pray and you feel weird about it and you decide to do that for a little bit, and then that's the end of it. But the best thing that can happen is that your whole life will change. Everything about who you are, everything you're carrying, the weight that is so heavy, the pain that is so unbearable, the hopelessness that keeps you in bed, everything that you're going through, God can take that away, and He wants to. And I promise you that that's what He will give you, is the love, is the peace, the hope, the joy, the everything that you are seeking, the freedom. It's all found in God. I would just encourage you, the way that you are, go to Jesus. You don't need to be this religious, knowledgeable, great person. I'm certainly not. And I think that's where I'm going to end this. But if I can be praying for you in any way, I have an Instagram for this podcast that I will leave in the show notes. I have a personal Instagram. Please reach out to me in any way that I can be praying for you. We're all in this together. We're not meant to walk through this life alone. So if there's any way that I can be here for somebody, please reach out to me. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for letting me be vulnerable and be honest. And my goodness, that was terrifying for me. So I probably said some things that weren't right. And I know that I'm going to stumble in the future, but I pray that you will have grace with me and that we go into next week with something that I'm also excited to share and that you will get value from. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and that you begin to see the good work that God wants to start in you. Have a good one. Bye.